Again, thanks everybody for joining us here today in our Leaders Online sessions that we're doing here with the Fort Worth Chamber. So wanted to introduce Kit. Kit was with us last week talking about setting up virtual offices. We had her, wanted to invite her back to talk about cash flow management. And we know that's a lot of topics that people are discussing right now and asking us questions on. And in this time of down revenue, how do we manage our cash flow correctly? So, with that, I'll turn it over to Kit and allow her to give her presentation. And like she said, questions, please feel free to send those in and we will answer those as we go. Kit?
Great, perfect. Well, I'm going to share my screen with everyone. We got a couple of slides here to start, but as Chris says, as we go through, feel free to drop questions in and I'll try to answer those as best I can at the end. So we're going to talk about cash and cost management. I'm going to move this over here. All right, just a brief, my background, why am I qualified to speak about this? My background was being the chief product officer at two public companies, Weight Watchers and Shutterstock. Probably most relevant for the time that we're going through right now, I was at Weight Watchers during the financial crash, based up in New York City. And unfortunately, we had to go through some really tough decisions as a company about laying off employees and how we were going to handle that. And so I did live through that at that company that in the US alone had over 20,000 employees. And then I am a venture partner now at First Mark Capital and spent time there, which has a bunch of technology startups. And then I've also started my own company here in Fort Worth, which is Core Ventures. So a couple of topics I wanted to cover. My slides. We're going to talk about cash management and cost management. The very first piece of this that's most important that I want to make sure everyone's doing is to increase your news cycle. So what this means from my experience is that you want to be reviewing your revenue and cash daily. I don't even think weekly is quite enough. You've got to get it into a daily and weekly at a minimum view. You need to have that information to be making the best decisions during this time. So that was the first thing that I would be doing for a business. The next thing that's most important is to build forecasts with multiple scenarios. I would be building this for at least 6 months out at this point, 3 to 6 months. And I would be building my, worst, most likely, and best scenarios into that. I would also be building those scenarios with different kind of stress tests, with the ability to change different variables over time. I don't think going into this, anyone would have expected the scenarios we're talking about with revenue for certain businesses decreasing the way that they have because of things like stay at home and shelter in place orders. And so obviously you need to be building the scenarios for kind of some extreme situations, even if you thought you would never see it, so you can make the best decision. This is the foundation of what you should be doing now. And I know probably many of you have already started to do this. With that news cycle, this is the quote that I keep saying to folks in my network and thinking, is that leaders see things as they truly are, not better and not worse. And that is what the hardest thing is in a time like this, because if you see things as they truly are, you don't want to be overly pessimistic. We're going to be talking today about making really tough decisions, letting go employees, cutting costs, deferring payments to vendors. All of these are tough decisions. And you need to make sure that you're making them with your best view of how things truly are. I think some businesses might be thinking too pessimistic, and you can imagine the downhill effects of that, of making too deep of a cut, and other businesses thinking that this might go away in a week or two, which from my perspective would probably be too optimistic. So this is the most important point probably of the entire session today, and we can talk about more about how do you try to get this right. So I'm going to talk first about cash management, and then we'll talk about cost management today. So on the cash management front, the first tip, right, is to extend or negotiate your payables. The top thing here is to either reduce your payables or defer them to a later date and time. This is literally going expense by expense line and doing this right now. So, your biggest expense, let's say, is rent. You should be calling your landlord. You likely honestly should have called them already to either reduce your rent or also delay those payments and defer them off. But I would say this is where having a true budget comes into mind. Don't just think of your large expenses. You want to look down every single expense line and think about it that way. I'm also telling people to be creative. There's a lot of options. One thing I will say about being creative is that it is almost impossible to be creative if you are fearful, period. I don't think I've met a single person who can think creatively if they're in a state of fear. So the first thing as a leader I suggest is you get yourself out of a state of fear. For me, what has always worked best is to get in a state of gratitude about everything you're thankful for in your life. And then in that state, go and think creatively about how you can solve these problems for your business. Some examples of being creative would be things like consider equity. You know, it might be that your landlord, you're asking to defer or reduce your rent payments, and you might be willing to give that landlord a piece of equity in your company. I always think when you're in that kind of negotiation, you want to put yourself in that other person's shoes, whether it be a vendor or a landlord. But just to keep the landlord topic, it might be that the landlord might want confidentiality. They might be fearful that every rentee would come and negotiate. And so they don't want you spreading to your other neighbors that you got a 50% reduction in your rent, or that you were able to delay payments for 6 months or some amazing deal. So think creatively, things like that. You want to put yourselves in that person's shoes so you can negotiate in the best way to push off those payables that you can defer. My other one is just keep asking. I think this is a great example of the squeaky wheel. I say this because I think, as we all feel, this week versus last week feels like a year, and versus normal times. Things are changing very dramatically, and there's new information every day. You just got to keep asking and asking in new creative ways. That's the first step. Next one is you want to boost cash on hand, probably obvious, but you want to boost as much cash on hand as you can have, kind of creating that war chest for this time. My list of this is accelerating your receivables. This will be a hard time to do that. I'm not saying this is easy, but if you can accelerate the receivables, if there are certain clients that are willing to accelerate it from you, this is another example of it, but pulling forward cash, which is things like a number of businesses we've seen in the area are offering gift certificates, or also just coming up with creative product solutions of things that they can sell now. I think in our area in Tarrant County, there's a lot of goodwill of people trying to help local businesses if they also offer solutions and explain their situation. So I would be very honest with your customers or potential customers, explaining your situation and asking for help if you need it. The other point I didn't mention about receivables, but it's obviously a basic business practice, is that a lot of people are delayed on receivables. You want to be able to follow up with those receivables, but I would do an effort on that to also see if you can close any delay of receivables for your business. Another tip here is to draw your full cash amount on any credit lines you have, doing that judiciously, but again, benefiting from having cash on hand, which for many businesses, we always refer to it as the oxygen for your business. So you need to make sure that you have that cash on hand. So those are a couple of the high level tips about trying to accelerate your receivables. The other one is if you're already planning on raising money, obviously coming from the VC world and others, you're going to have to do this with plenty of time. Just expect the cycle to be much longer than you would ever anticipate. Businesses that are raising money, the first question you're also going to get is, what is your COVID-19 response? I think where we are in the cycle around COVID, I'm still seeing businesses need to get ahead of that. I think a number of businesses are thinking creatively about things like gift certificates or, special boredom boxes that they can share with their customers, which might be a unique offering during this time. But I think you need to think about the long-term COVID response. And I think this is the thing people are a little bit behind right now. What I mean by that is we are probably in the largest behavior change experience maybe that our country has ever seen. Definitely in my lifetime, but meaning the way that everyone is changing about how they buy things, receive things, think about goods is all changing right now. And so almost every business needs to rethink that and rethink about how consumers are going to want to experience things. Great examples obviously in healthcare, and that going almost entirely digitized now versus where we were before. But it has to do with almost every single business, with even, grocery pickups. I'm sure many people who had never done online delivery are now doing it all the time. So I would get your view about what COVID will do for you in the long term, also thinking about that, especially as a pitch if you raise money. The other one I have on here is obviously negotiate with lenders. So the basics of this from my perspective are, deferring principal payments, discussing that with them, asking them to waive covenant tests for several quarters. You just want to start those conversations early. Start them early, and with a negotiator on this front, I suggest you ask for a lot. Ask for all of it now and see, they will likely try to walk you back, but ask for as much as you can. I put this in here, which again, I don't mean to put this out there as a fear-based statement. Again, my point is to see things that they are. But the reality is that banks and some of these large institutions will likely be bailed out. Your small business will not. I would be using these kind of conversations as ammunition for these discussions with banks, who, if their creditors, are likely going to be digging into your business and asking what you're doing based on what's happened with COVID. All right, I'm going to dive a little bit into cost management as well. So cost management, obviously this goes hand in hand with the cash management side. The philosophy, which I'm sure many people share, is make the hard decisions early. I think many businesses are already putting hiring freezes in place. Your next step is to take every single employee on your payroll and think through in a very hard way between whether they're going to stay, whether you have to let them go, or whether there's some possibility for an unpaid leave that you discuss with them, after which they will come back. So those are kind of the solutions. I would suggest you go person by person and really think about that in a hard way. I'm going to come up because there is one caveat to this, which is that we are still new in understanding what the federal government is going to do with relief packages. There are some, with what passed the House, some early leads about if you maintain employees through this time and you are a business that has seen, I think, at least 50% reduction in your receipts or have had to shut down entirely, that there'll be a tax benefit if you continue to employ employees. I don't want to speak about that fully yet because honestly, I don't have enough of the data to speak about it intelligently. So my suggestion is that you investigate that and then make these really hard discussions. The other stuff we're seeing across companies is either salary cuts or also salary deferrals that you discuss with your employee base, and you can pay it back at a later point in time when the business has picked back up. What I will say with this, having gone through it, is two things. One is that it's impossible to over communicate with the employees who stay. It's very common actually when people go through a series of layoffs that a bunch of your time and energy is with laying off the employees that are leaving. I usually find that then you're not spending enough time communicating with the employees who are staying about honest answers about how you made these decisions. What was your thought process? What scenario planning you did, per my earlier point, that led to these decisions. When do you think you'll be able to hire people back? You're going to get the top question, obviously, is, am I at risk? Or is this all that's going to happen? And that, as a boss, is the hardest question you can ever be asked. It's why I wanted to put this up here. I'll say this is, again, a hard but true statement I have lived, which is that I generally believe that deep cuts are better than 3 cuts. The hard part about this, obviously, is that you don't want to go too deep than you have to. These are employees who, for me, felt like family in many organizations. You don't want to let people go if you don't have to. Again, make sure you are truly seeing your business in the best way you can to make these decisions. But 3 cuts are usually worse. And the reason why is because if you make a cut and then you have to go and make another one, and heaven forbid another one, your whole organization will become fear-based. People will be very worried about their jobs versus feeling like you made the cuts you needed to run the business based on how the business is truly performing, and for the next X amount of time. Now, I think the hard part about this is that there's a lot more unknown. We don't know how long this is going to last fully. You don't know what behavior changes are going to unfold at the back end of this, or if things will completely bounce back. So I get that this is a statement that's easier said than done. But in general, I find that it is better to make the harder decisions first than have to do it 3 times. Another part of the cost management, obvious point, but cut all non-essential spend. I would have a plan A and a plan B. When I've done this, it means going line by line through your budget, and you label it A or B. You label the things that you're going to cut and negotiate now and the things you're going to cut and negotiate later. I think a number of businesses will go through, and it's very common to say, well, there's no way we could change that. They're saying that out of fear. They're saying that not out of creative thinking usually. And then when, if there's a further downturn or the business hits further challenges, at a later point, they will go and scramble and they will have a new plan. Try to have a plan A and a plan B now, so you're not scrambling later. And having multiple plans lets you make these hard decisions on things like your workforce properly now. And then obviously I would be negotiating all contracts. Very common thing is that people say, yes, I'm going to negotiate all my contracts. And then they don't realize that you are about to be negotiated with as well. So plan to be negotiated with and know how you're going to respond to that. The last point I'm making here, and again, as I already mentioned, is that this is clearly what's different about this time is also the need to study state and federal relief efforts. This is not the same thing as just a single business seeing a downturn. This is obviously national, and there's a lot of efforts going on. So for example, you can go to sba.gov and read about the bridge loans they're offering. And what was announced coming out of last night out of the House was the tax credit for retaining employees. Again, I don't have enough information today to answer this intelligently, to tell you what you should be doing, but you should be reading about this because there are implications of what you do with your workforce that could relate to tax benefits that are going to come later on. That was my very quick run through. I think we're going to dive in and answer any questions that Chris has. And I can maybe share some other ideas that we're hearing as well as people ask those.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that, Kit, and I apologize to everybody for the technical challenge we've had here today. And this video will be available on our Facebook. We'll post it to the Facebook so those folks can see it as well. Don't have any questions as of yet, unfortunately, but I do want to say that when we talk about the stimulus and what's going through the U.S. government right now, we are planning a session on that next week. We're bringing in some folks who can speak to that once it gets approved, once we have a chance to analyze it and figure out what that really looks like. So that will be coming up. Like I said, unfortunately, we don't have any Q&A at this point, but as we share this, we'll get some, as those questions come in, Kit, myself, the chamber will be happy to respond back to those. So with that, Kit, did you have anything else to chime in on?
No, I think the only thing I'll add to this, which is, again, the hard thing, it was kind of like my earlier statement around you cannot creatively problem solve for your business if you're in a state of fear yourself as a leader. So you need to figure out how you get yourself in the right mental state. That is the biggest advice. It sounds like the most loosey-goosey piece of advice, but I'll just tell you, if you were going through a budgeting exercise of doing plan A and plan B, and you find yourself in that moment feeling anxiety, I guarantee you are not doing the best budgeting exercise you can do. So the biggest thing you can do as a leader of your organization or as a team member in a company is to figure out methodologies right now to manage your psychology so that you can handle these things positively. And I mean, there's tons of resources, but this is something that a lot of executives won't necessarily talk about, but it's something that I used to always talk about with my teams because it is the thing that helps you creatively problem solve.
Right. And the one question, we actually do have a couple questions here. And one, I don't know if you can answer, or we have to wait. These small business loans, will they apply to nonprofits? I think the SBA had talked about that before. We don't know really what the stimulus bill has in it. Can you speak to that at all?
I actually think we don't know yet. So I think we're waiting for details on that front.
Great. And then here's a question.
Just a background on that. Like, again, okay, but instead of sitting in a wait and see mode, what should you be doing? You should be doing multiple scenarios. In what scenario would a loan help extend you? If you get no loan as a nonprofit, what are you going to do instead? The thing you can do today is to get ahead and run some financial models so you take charge of it. And I would be doing multiple scenarios. And not to be, I used to run financial planning teams way back in the day. I would be building an Excel model that has variables that I can change it in my model. So I can plug and play with the numbers and see what the change in the numbers does. Take control of your business by building that model. If you do not have those financial skills, go find someone in your network who does, because that is how you get in control instead of being afraid and feeling like this is happening to you. You need to get ahead of it.
Great. Okay. I do have a question here. Receivables against payables. To what extent do you leverage the receivables now to get those in earlier? Won't people be pulling back their payables now? How does that look? I think you mentioned that a little bit before.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a give and take. What I would say on this is like any negotiation. Meaning if you just were to send out, hey, can you pay us now? That's probably going to be less effective. You need to use persuasion techniques. My advice to companies would be your best persuasion techniques I find a lot of businesses, for example, they'll spend time thinking about their marketing campaigns. How do they market to customers or businesses? And they don't think about marketing campaigns to pulling in the receivables. They think of it as some back end spreadsheet accounting task. So that's a good example of like, rethink it. What is your message? Why should that person pay you? What will you do for them? That can include both, why it's important to you, what you will do to them at a later point in time. It's just get in a different frame for some of these activities. And I would think of pulling your receivables in as almost a marketing tactic and plan it. And again, marketing campaigns, your most compelling message, you make it look pretty. You have, you think about how you time it. It's not just one message. You expect multiple impressions before someone converts. Again, think about that part of your business in this way.
Right. And then we had another question here that I don't know if you can speak to or not, but I know we had a previous panelist talk about this. Is the disaster loan available to businesses that are able to get bank loans? I know that we had a couple of people on that said the SBA loans, they're available to a multitude of businesses, but bank loan, if you're able to get a bank loan, maybe go that direction first versus going to the disaster loan program. Do you have any comments on that?
I don't have comments on that. I guess I think we need to get more experts to talk about the disaster relief. I'm just not up to speed with that. But what I would say is this is a good opportunity. And I know it's tough because it depends who your bank is right now. But if you are with a local bank, talk about it as a local bank. Talk about how you will continue to use their business for years and years, that you will commit to be, do your business banking with them for X amount of time. Rethink that. And that's kind of what I mean about in any of these conversations, you need to put yourself in the other person's shoes and imagine the experience you're giving off with them. So this is my point about the receivables. No one wants to get a cold email that just with the bill attached that looks like something from an accountant. If you put a beautiful email that explains why you're trying to follow up, you'd really appreciate it. Maybe there's some incentive to do it down the line. Same thing with the banks, right? These are people. These are not just robots. So if you have a local bank, discussing with them, thinking about how they think about it, they're obviously going to be worried about businesses defaulting during this time. So what is your answer to that? And that is why I'm saying, I would think about your creditors in some way similar to if you were trying to raise money. If someone was trying to raise money from me right now, giving me a pitch for their business, I'm going to want a solid plan of them understanding how their customers' behaviors have changed today from COVID, when they think it's going to end, even if that is speculation, but that they've thought about it, that they've been diligent, and also how those customers are going to change behavior on the back end of it. Maybe there's some upside opportunity for your business that you haven't thought about. Again, it's business by business. If you're running, I'm thinking about downtown Fort Worth. If you're running the downtown Fort Worth art show, you're probably having to talk about something much different and bigger. You're asking tough questions like, can you defer it and have that same downtown art show later? Or do you need to think about what is the future for online art shows? And I, as a team, would be thinking about both those things.
Yeah, great. Well, great. Well, that's all the questions we have. Again, apologize for this. If as you're going live, you got to be flexible and deal with some of these things. But this video will be available on our Facebook here in a little bit. So, Kit, thank you very much for coming in. Hopefully, we can bring you back again soon.
Great.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Good luck. And like I said, we're going to have a whole slate of different Facebook Lives, hopefully, next week. So look for our emails, and hopefully we'll tune in and talk again next week. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.